Thank you, Dave. We're celebrating the 40th anniversary of GSCA.
Yes.
So we're getting a lot of people that were here for a long time. Like, I think I've been here almost the whole 40 years. I saw my first IMAX in 1978, To Fly.
Yeah.
And do you remember what year you made the scene, got involved with
It was
us?
it was 1990. So I was a planetarium person
me too.
for 15, 17 years before I got into the IMAX world, and I actually, as most planetarians did, they thought the IMAX was not a good thing.
I know,
right?
I know. Scary.
Yeah, but in 1990, we were getting ready to move into our new building at Union Terminal, and my boss at the time, that some people may remember, DeVere Burt.
I remember.
Yeah, DeVere Burt came to me about 6 months before opening, and I was still the planetarium director in the old building. And DeVere came to me and said, "Dave, I know you probably don't want to do this, but we're desperate, and we should have hired a theater manager before now, but I want you to go finish the sort of opening of the theater, and then you can make a decision after that if you want to go back to the planetarium or stay with IMAX."
Yeah.
I think he knew that I would get sucked into IMAX and stay there. So that's kind of how it all started for me, and I really hadn't seen any films before that that I recall. But I was immediately sent to Chicago and Boston to kind of learn a little bit about the medium.
When I was in Boston, I went to Chicago, learned what I could from them.
Yeah.
And that was the coolest thing back then. We all shared everything.
Yep.
You know, like whatever we learned, we always passed on to everybody.
Yeah, everybody was extremely willing to help out and help get our theater open and ready to go.
Yeah, it's like, that was good the way everybody did that. We were all friends and shared. Now, you talked about Mike Sullivan.
Yeah. So when DeVere came to me and said, "Dave, I need for you to do this," we already had Mike Sullivan on board as our consultant. He'd been working on the project for well over a year. But I'd had no interface with him at all because I was on the planetarium, and I was too cool for IMAX, right? So I had no interface with Mike Sullivan, although I certainly knew him because he came from the planetarium background also, right? So I'd heard of his name, but never actually met him. But anyway, so when I got pushed into the OMNIMAX role for our theater, the first thing I did was meet Mike Sullivan, and Mike and I just like instantly hit it off because we were both planetarians. I was behind him in the curve, but I was kind of following the same path that he did in his career to some degree.
Well, he invented OMNIMAX.
Yeah.
He thought of it.
Yeah.
So incredible.
Yeah, so I spent the next 6 months literally mentoring under Mike.
Yeah.
Getting our theater open.
You're so lucky to be with him.
And I can still remember, some of the things that he really sort of pushed us into. It's like, okay, we were going to have these opening events, and we needed some shorter film pieces, right? Because we were going to have hundreds of people go through the theater in these opening events.
Yep.
And my team wanted to do a package of trailers, and Mike Sullivan said, "No, that's the last thing. You can't do trailers because that doesn't give people the real sense for how it's going to be a story that has a beginning, middle, and end. It's just like back-to-back high-energy sequences." Yes.
Yeah.
So you cannot do that. So we went out and got a piece. I can't remember the name of the piece, but it was a shorter film. It was about an 18-minute film about flying geese.
I think Skyward.
Yes, Skyward. That was it.
That was Stephen Lowe's first film.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we got brought in Skyward because it was a short piece.
To show off the medium.
But it had a beginning, middle, end. It had a story to it.
Yeah.
And it worked actually very well.
Yeah.
It worked very well.
That reminds me, I also went to St. Paul when I was going to open the theater in Boston, and Mike Day gave me some advice that was so good. He goes, "You only open once. So when you open that theater, open big, and you'll ride in the momentum for a long time." And I did that at every theater, and I told it to everybody else.
Yeah.
Because the story you just told us, that's what I did in Boston, and he did it in St. Paul. So it worked.
Yes.
It worked.
Yes. And now that you mentioned St. Paul, I now know what the first OMNIMAX film was that I saw.
What?
It was Great Barrier Reef at St. Paul.
Yeah.
Because I remember going out there earlier for totally different reasons. Before I came to Cincinnati, I actually worked at a planetarium that had the same Spitz equipment that St. Paul had.
And that's why you went?
And I went out there because we were having trouble getting our Spitz equipment to work. So where I worked at the time, Eastern Kentucky University, sent me out to St. Paul to look at their equipment and see how it was working. And so I went to see one of their shows. And of course, at the beginning of their shows, because this was the Michael Sullivan way, you know, they had these OMNIMAX film pieces. And the one I saw was the Great Barrier Reef footage that they did.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the first time you see IMAX or OMNIMAX, you never forget it. Like mine was To Fly, and that changed my life because I was a planetarium director too. But I knew immediately I wanted to get into IMAX. And that film for me, I'll never forget it because it started small and went big, but the underwater was perfect for the dome.
Yeah, and our first film was Blue Planet. In fact, Blue Planet was coming out at that time. We didn't do the premiere for Blue Planet. I'm sure it happened in Smithsonian.
Probably.
But we were literally like a day or two later.
That's awesome.
And I remember, this was like my first big lesson in IMAX film, is they sent me a print of they sent me the unassembled print, and my projectionist put it together, and this was before I even had the sound. They sent me the print before the sound. So we put the print together, and we looked at it in the theater, and I thought, this film stinks, it sucks. Right? That's what I really thought. Because I didn't have the sound. Yes, and that made me realize how important the soundtrack is. And ever since then I've said the sound is really 51% of the show.
It is.
Because you can listen to the sound and appreciate the sound without the picture. But the picture is nothing without the sound. And that was kind of my first lesson. But Blue Planet is still, to this day,
I love that
one of my favorite films. I mean, Toni Myers did such a fantastic job with that film.
And she narrated it too.
Yes, and she came out for our opening, and I still listen to the music to this day for that.
Now, you had told me a story about your first GSCA.
Yeah.
Because it was around the
that same time. Yeah.
Tell that story.
Yeah, so it was 1990s when we opened our theater, November 10th, 1990. I still remember that day.
I got all my opening dates.
So the 1990 conference was in The Hague.
Right.
So I'd never been to a conference before. I'd only been on the job, say, 3 or 4 months. And I got sent to The Hague. It was not only my first conference, it was my first trip out of North America. So it was
Packed it in.
Yes. So it was a scary thing for me that I was going to a conference that I'd never been to before in Europe, which I had never been to before, with a bunch of people that I had no idea who they were, except for Mike Sullivan, you know. So that was a scary time for me, and I remember sitting around the table at the opening board meeting when every theater was represented at these board meetings.
Board meeting, we all went one by one.
Yeah,
Said
and
how
introduced
our theater
ourselves.
Was doing.
Yes, exactly. And they came to me, and it's like, all I could say was, you know, I'm from Cincinnati, and I should not be here, because I really need to be home because we have so much to do to get ready for the opening of the theater.
Yeah.
And Mike. You know, Mike was always very calming. He said, Dave, don't worry about it. The opening is going to come, it's going to go, it'll be fine. Don't worry about it. Don't obsess about it. So he had been through this so much, you know, that he was very calm, even though I was kind of in a panic.
Every opening is insane, the amount of work that you have to do and get the word out, and you have to sell this experience, the film, everything. But you did it right, because man, here you are, how many years later?
Still 28 years later.
And now you're renovating.
Yeah, renovating the theater.
It's fantastic.
And Mike, back to Mike, you know, Mike and I stayed, you know, he was my mentor, and Mike and I stayed really good friends way beyond his working on our theater project to get it open. And we had another great experience working together kind of later in his career when he was the CEO at the museum down in Mobile, Alabama.
Yeah, I remember that, yeah.
He was working on a Pompeii exhibit project, and then we got involved in that project. So I got kind of reunited with Mike, and we had some good experiences working with that. And I even then after that, when he retired to his home outside of Denver, I actually went and visited him and Eleanor, and they were so hospitable. Their place was just so beautiful out in Denver, and it's that's kind of my last connection with him was in his home, a couple years ago.
Well, this is a good tribute for Mike, because he's passed on now too. So I'm really glad that you could talk about him, because he was so important in our industry. And it's really great to give him the tribute.
Yeah, as you say, he came up with the whole OMNIMAX thing. He set it all in motion.
He called IMAX and said, "Let's try this."
Yeah.
Fantastic idea.
Yeah, and he's my mentor. I still consider him my mentor. He's the one that he kind of proved to me that I could transition from the planetarium world to the IMAX world, because he did it.
He did it, yeah.
And then I got sucked in very quickly by going to The Hague. It's like, okay, this is good.
I know. I love the IMAX industry and the people, because look we're such friends. Like every year we all get together. And we still are friends.
It just never goes away.
I love the camaraderie.
The biggest issue with me for retiring, which will happen someday fairly soon,
Me too, yeah.
is going to be missing the camaraderie of the IMAX world.
Me too.
Yeah.
Me too. Well, let's not think about that now.
Yep.
Let's celebrate. So, thank you.
Yep, no
Thank
problem.
You,
I
Dave.
enjoy this. I enjoy this talk. Yeah.
Me too. Thank you.
Yep.